The objects and artifacts that define a culture. For many Native Americans, those items are no longer in their possession. Instead, they're held by museums, universities, and other institutions. And while efforts continue to try to return them to tribal nations, something else that was taken away decades ago can never fully be restored.
It was just always hanging in essentially our living room.
For Brandy Tyree, this isn't just a buckskin dress.
In a perfect world, every time somebody sees and hears about Emma, I hope they think about how important it is that we are inclusive and that people get to be who they are.
It's an artifact made in 1903 by her great-grandmother, Emma Sandsaver, which was donated to the University of Montana by Tyree's mother. Sandsaver was a Native American student at the Fort Shaw Indian Boarding School, one of more than 400 government-operated boarding schools that force Native children to assimilate by stripping them of their language and culture.
They had to be white at all times.
Except when it was convenient.
And I think the school decided that a way to get publicity for how awesome these schools were, that they would take these young women around to play basketball. They let them design and make their own Native dresses that they could wear at halftime. How confusing was it? You were making a dress so you could be yourself at halftime, but all the other times you had to be what was somebody else's definition of white, a culture that wasn't yours.
They played so well that they were invited to the Louisiana State Purchase Exposition of 1904, better known as the St. Louis World's Fair. Sandsaver and her teammates defeated every opponent and were coined champions of the world.
So I found out that it was intact and donated to the school. And so it was on display there, and I was kind of blown away at that point.
Teacher Cody Munson, a first-generation descendant of the Salish tribe, among others, uses what has become known as Emma's dress as a teaching tool.
It's something that we can visualize and see.
Now at the University of Montana, the school's anthropology department preserves the artifact.
To a certain extent, Native students kind of have a sense of pride that kind of comes along with the story of the Fort Shaw team and Emma's dress. And, you know, bringing some of that reality back to light shows that they have a little more story than people have told previously.
Students Raymond Combs and Michaelin Runningfisher support the efforts to preserve the dress.
I just introduced myself in the Blackfoot language. My Indian name was given to me by my grandpa, and it means shining eyes woman. That has been passed down generations. So when I do introduce myself, I do say it proudly.
Runningfisher says her grandparents and great-grandparents were forced to attend boarding schools, which makes her work here even more meaningful.
There are protocols with how you enter and exit and introduce artifacts into the room that they're being kept.
Yeah, so for everyone it's different. Every tribe is uniquely different. When I go in there, I have to protect myself. So I smudge myself with sage and put that protection with dealing with these objects, you know, coming in there with the right mind, the right heart, being respectful. It's really important to acknowledge that these objects are important, you know, talking to them and making sure, you know, like, I'm here to take care of you and I'm gonna bring you home because you're gonna be at rest eventually.
This brings up the difficult conversation around repatriation. Recent reporting found that the remains and funerary objects of more than 110,000 Native American, Native Hawaiian, and Alaskan Natives' ancestors are still being held by museums, universities, and federal agencies. That's despite a 1990 federal law calling for the items to be returned to descendants or tribal nations.
I maintain that's maybe 20% of what has actually been stolen. They're everywhere. They're in private collections, they're in universities, they're in museums, and half the time they're not even displayed. So what are you doing with those remains? It approaches the macabre.
Many of these institutions still hold in their possession pieces of history that don't belong to them.
Yeah. I mean, my first thought is, and it might be naive, but it's just crazy to think that we do that. Like, why? I mean, heck, if I borrow a friend's sweater, I want to make sure they get it back right away, right? So why do people need to keep something that's not theirs? I think All these artifacts, they need to go back to where they belong and where they're honored and cherished and people can learn the history about them. One thing I'm most proud of my parents, especially my mom, she's worked so hard for this, is that this is a collaboration for all of us to learn. And it feels like we would have Emma's permission.
The University of Montana currently holds 67 Native American artifacts. 42 have been made available for return, while 25 have not. The university says it will continue to partner closely with tribal historic preservation officers and the Tribal Cultural Heritage Board to ensure repatriation. The sacred artifacts are stored protectively and can only be seen by those given official permission, as we were with Emma's dress, which is building a bridge between the past and the future.
When children come and see it, what do you hope they take away?
I hope it makes them curious, to dive into the curiosity of what they're learning in school and how much more there is to learn and different places to learn. Also, just when they come visit here, they're on a college campus, so I hope that inspires them to dream their big dreams. But yeah, just to be curious and to question history.
Question history. You know, part of the challenge of returning some of these objects is the fact that there is no distinct tribal affiliation. They're still trying to figure out which tribes own these pieces of history. And so the University of Montana has been working to, establish relationships, other entities across the country, same situation.
It's good that they're having the conversations. I think we've said that before. You hope that they can find who those belong to and start returning.
And just to see the dress in person, right? Not just see a picture of it, not just hear about it, but just to
it's
touch
on
it
display.
Yeah, exactly.
That's important too.
Yeah.